Were you part of the Gifted and Talented program as a child? And if so, do you have a hard time remembering what happened to you within these programs? If this is true, you're not the only one. At this point, there has been thousands of people who have spoken out about their weird experiences of being tested within the United States classroom for what looks like extrasensory perception. And this isn't just another video breaking down the large conglomeration of anecdotes. I have actual proof that'll be in the description of this video, CIA documents proving that they in fact have done experiments in United States classroom for extrasensory perception. Somebody by the name of Crypted Candy reached out to me via email telling me, hey, dude, I saw your content about this particular topic. It's evolved in an interesting way. I actually found this particular CIA document and made a YouTube video about it. And so I pulled him on for this episode today, along with another creator named Wicked Mysterious. The two of them together have been really diving deep heavily into this question of how and why did the government do extrasensory perception experiments on children within the United States classrooms, right? So within this conversation, we talk about how he found this document, what this document contains, and some of the kind of larger implications of this all. I found this to be a super interesting topic, and so if you have personal experiences with this, please go leave those in the comments down below. Other than that, thank you for tapping back into the Launchpad podcast. I hope that you enjoy it. Peace out and much love.
Yes, I'm still a skeptic when it comes down to some sci stuff, and we'll talk. I'm sure we'll get into that, but you know, I'm a concept guy. So when I saw people on TikTok, this is where I came across it on TikTok. People on TikTok just posting videos about, like, I was in the Gifted and Talented program, and I remember putting on headphones and drinking the pink drink and playing with Zener cards and doing tangrams. And when I first heard of that stuff, I genuinely was like, this is all BS. People are funny. Like, I generally thought that. Like, that was my first reaction. But I still thought it was interesting as a concept, as a creator. I was like, I could make a video out of this for sure. I could definitely make a video. But I thought it was complete just funniness. I was genuinely not taking it seriously at that moment. And in fact, I even spent like 2 to 3 months making a video debunking this. That was my goal, was like, I'm going to debunk this, and I'm going to kind of like, I think this is silly. And what I did was, a lot of people like this. This is what a lot of people say. They say there's no documents on Gifted and Talented programs. There's too many documents if you actually go look in the right places, which is, you'll look at educational sites like ERIC, which is Educational Resources Information Center. You type in Gifted and Talented program in there, you're going to get thousands of documents. It's not going to be the documents that people are going to find interesting. They're just going to be normal curriculum, learning model breakdowns, kind of the approach, all that kind of stuff. But there is documents. I think people push that narrative like there's no documents. There's a lot of documents. It's just not going to be the CIA documents that people are trying to find. But essentially, I spent like 2 to 3 months trying to disprove the whole thing. And I read a book called The Gifted Child by Abraham Tannenbaum, which was released in 1984, I believe. 1984. It was the most comprehensive book at that time. So the most comprehensive publication on gifted programs. So it really went through like everything, the history, the thinking, what they're looking for in children. And I thought I had it. I was like, okay, this is it. I have the enough information to debunk all of this stuff. And I was working on it. I had like 30 minutes of a video ready to go to debunk it. And at that time, I was kind of looking at, I had a friend who was helping me research for the channel. And I also simultaneously encountered about 4 documents that were talking about psychic children in China. Like I found it somewhere, I believe on Internet Archive, or somehow I came across these documents. But I was so deep in my debunking stage that I didn't pay them a lot of mind. I was just sort of like, oh, well, that sounds interesting that the CIA was interested in psychic children from China. But the more I thought about it, I was just like, man, like, if they're interested in children from China, why wouldn't they be interested in American children? Like, I just kept thinking that. And so I had a conversation with this guy, with my friend Alex, and I was like, hey, I'm debunking this thing. I have these 4 documents. Do you want to look over them as I'm making my video? Because when I'm in video mode, I'm editing, I'm recording, I'm busy. So I was like, do you want to look into them and see if you see anything? So he's reading through it, and a couple of documents. He's like, oh, we talked like 2 days later. He's like, there's nothing in these documents that talks about anything yet. And I'm like, okay, cool. Then we start kind of talking, and then we start looking at this one document called Human Paranormal Capabilities document. It's not called document, sorry. It's called Human Paranormal Capabilities. And pretty much on that same document, on page 75, all of a sudden they're talking about ESP experiments in schools. And so ESP stands for extrasensory perception, which essentially means psychic abilities. And so once we saw ESP in schools, we were like flipping out. We were like, holy crap. Like this is because all it took for me at that point was to find one example of them testing for psychic ability in schools. And I would be like, yep, if I could just find one example, I'm going to break the internet. And so once we found that one example, we kept reading that document, of course, and they talk about a Florida classroom. So they talk about a classroom in Florida where a teacher was testing her students for psychic ability. And then it said a very generalized big statement, which was the classroom is an extremely good place for ESP experiments. So immediately I was like, okay, well, this means that they've obviously done this a lot. They've done this in the past enough to come to that conclusion that the classroom is an extremely good place for ESP experiments. And and so that same document is about 3-4 pages of them basically talking about experiments in a Dutch elementary school. They talk about how there was this guy named J.G. Bushback. I know I'm saying the pronunciation of his name wrong, but some guy named J.G. Bushback was doing ESP experiments in schools over there under his jurisdiction. And then Duke University invited him to the United States to conduct experiments on 6th to 8th graders, 6th, 7th, 8th graders. And so they were inviting people from overseas to come and test children in American classrooms. And it was all in this document. It was all in this document. And so as we once we got over that initial shock, we started, that's when I literally dropped the debunking video that I was creating, and I was putting all my attention on this. So I spent like 2 or 3 months, like essentially like wasting time. But once I found now this was my new focus, and now that video was gone and I never use it. And so, which 30 minutes, it takes a long time for me to make 30 minutes of a video. But anyway, at the top, so on this page 75, where they start talking about ESP experiments in schools in this document, Human Paranormal Capabilities, keep in mind that most of the document is just talking about psychic children from China and how the CIA went over to investigate them. Turns out these children were pretty much BSing. They were BSing their psychic abilities, and the CIA caught onto it really quick and just found out that these kids were faking it. And that's what most of the document is talking about. But on page 75, that's when they start mentioning these ESP experiments in American classrooms. If you look at the header of that page 75, it talks about, first of all, it says the author. And the author is, I don't have it in front of me. This is off of memory, by the way. So impressed. Everybody should be impressed. No, I'm kidding. What is it? L.E. Lyons. They say the author is L.E. Lyons, and started investigating that guy. That guy that's a pseudonym that doesn't exist. And so, but underneath that, it talks about chapter 3, advances in parapsychological research. And that's when we found out that advances in parapsychological research is essentially a 11 book series that details all types of stuff about extrasensory perception or psychic ability. But it spends a lot of time talking about all the experiments they conducted in schools, testing students for psychic ability. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of this. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I remember like after watching that video and you have it there within the description of your video, the source itself on CIA.gov, and like going to that document and going to page 75 and reading that directly. It was so strange because it was like that came out of nowhere compared to the rest of the document of like it directly admitting to that happening within the United States in particular. Right, within like Florida and stuff, and then the Duke guy, and then it was like quickly. It felt like towards the end of it, like trying to like backtrack softly like landing it, being like, oh, and like nothing's really happened in 10 years like since then with this, right? And I don't know if it was some mistake, if they forgot that that was in there. It's odd, but like the thing is with the, I guess I haven't had the chance to read the whole like 100 pages or so that it is, but like with the Chinese children, uh, can you tell me more about that and the results of the Chinese children that the CIA was observing and making this whole document about? Because I feel as if though maybe there probably was a lot of fiduciary and like the Chinese children maybe were, tricking people in some ways, but also like there probably was enough. There had to be something there, right, for them to want to do this, have the incentive to want to do this here within the United States as well, right? What do
Yes.
you think, man?
Well, to be clear, the Human Paranormal Capabilities document, that is a declassified CIA document. Again, I don't have any documents in front of me, but I believe it was declassified like March of 2003 or something like that, give or take. So, real CIA document, just reminding those listening. But anyway, so in the, kind of late 1970s, China had a wave of alleged psychic children. It was just a kind of a phenomena where, and I've actually seen a documentary on it where, all these elderly people are basically like bowing down to these children, and these children are there. They almost became like some kind of religious symbol for a lot of people. And so the CIA caught wind of this phenomena happening in China and basically sent a bunch of researchers, one of which is really important, which, by the way, I didn't even catch this until Danny noticed it, which was that Stanley Krypner was one of those researchers that ended up going to China. And Stanley Krypner was involved with the CIA. He's involved with the Monroe Project. With the Monroe Institute. Sorry, he was involved on the World Council of Gifted and Talented Children. This guy has so many crossovers that shouldn't exist, but they do within him. So a lot of this stuff is just Stanley Krypner. But anyway, so they sent a group of researchers to go investigate these alleged psychic children from China. And these children could allegedly do a bunch of wacky, weird stuff. Like they were able to write the contents of they could write a word or whatever in a piece of paper, crumble that piece of paper, stuff it in their underneath their armpits, even inside of their butts, which was like the weirdest. Why would you try that? Why would you even try to do that? But they were, so allegedly these children had all these capabilities to do that. And when the CIA finally went over, they found that they were just a lot of the times they were just colluding with one another, and essentially just finding all ways to fake this. And that's what a lot of that document is just talking about. It's just talking about how it almost seemed at a point where they almost felt bad for these kids, and they almost wanted to like let them win a little sometimes. And it's a very weird document, really. But yeah, page 75 of like 100 pages or whatever it is, it changes, the tonality changes, and that's when they start talking about ESP experiments in other schools like Holland, but and France, but that's when they mentioned the American schools being tested, and that document alluded to the fact that they've been doing this for a long time, especially with statements like the student teacher relationship is really important. Like, how do they know that? So that document told me a lot. It told me that they've been doing this. Not only has it happened, and here's the document proving it, but it told me that it happens a lot because they made a lot of statements like that. Student teacher relationship is highly important in the success of ESP, and also that ESP experiments in classrooms are like, they love that. So a lot of interesting statements from that one document that allude to more.
Right, right. There was a lot said that felt as if though there's a backlog. There's a lack of like context to things. Um, Danny, what do you think about page 75 and some of these things that we've just recently kind of discussed in your inquiry of it?
Yeah, so Human Paranormal Capabilities was a document that kind of just was one segment that opened up a whole can of worms. So basically, the purpose of that document was to collect and translate all the foreign research that had been done on paranormal capabilities and mostly out of China, like he said. So it's interesting because they were heavily researching what other academic facilities were doing, what other countries were doing, what kind of intelligence they had. So that was really the purpose of it. And it just so happens that it was exactly what we were looking for. And then from there, once you start looking at what's the name of that cryptid? I'm sorry,
The what?
the journal for parapsychology,
Oh, the
or
journal.
advances in
Yeah.
parapsychological research. Once you start looking at that, you can start finding all these studies. There's troves of them that talk about psychic testing in schools, and it's just like it's a never ending maze, because when you find one document, it'll start citing other studies that have been done. And then you're just going back into time to see where this all started. And it just seems to go on forever. There's countless studies. So it kind of just was the beginning of this whole can of worms that led us on this trail to proving that it actually happened.
Yeah. Okay, so really quickly for people who in the audience might not be familiar, what exactly is parapsychology?
So, parapsychology is the study of any anomalous phenomena to do with the brain. So, para is outside of, and then psychology is the traditional psychology that's studied. So, it's related to psi phenomena, which can be ESP, that's extrasensory perception. It could be things like metal bending, telepathy, um, precognition. There's a whole bunch of things that go into what psi is. Remote viewing is a big one that I think they tested in schools. I haven't had that proof just yet, but remote viewing is a big one that the CIA was interested in for psychic espionage, and basically to spy on the Soviet Union or China. So they were interested in parapsychology as a whole because they wanted to know what they could do with people's minds.
Mm. And the journal, I think you said it was a journal of parapsychology. Um, what is the connection again to the creation of that? It was a Stanley guy. Can you tell me more about that and your we uncovered about that in the creation of that journal? What you think the connection is? I mean, maybe that particular gentleman's access and research within this field did just truly accredit him to being able to make that type of text and have that level of academia and accreditation behind him and passion behind it. But like, why was this guy affiliated with the CIA creating this, journal for that? Right. Um,
So
Well, hang
Stanley
on,
Krypner, yeah, go
hang
ahead.
on, because we got to talk a little bit about that CIA document referenced advances in parapsychological research, and advances in parapsychological research isn't really the OG documentation for all of this stuff. It's more of a collection of different studies that derive from the Journal of Parapsychology, which is really the OG, where a lot of these studies originate from entirely. So, really, this goes back to Duke University. So, the Journal of Parapsychology is still active today. They're still printing. In fact, on my channel, I just covered one of the studies that they did in 2018 to 2020. So they're still doing stuff. And we could talk about the differences of like modern day psi testing in classrooms later. But so it goes. But they started in the early 1930s because of this guy named J.B. Rhine, and J.B. Rhine was he was interested in parapsychology. He actually coined the term extrasensory perception. He actually had a guy named Carl Zener designed Zener cards or Zener cards. I know that my pronunciation is wrong on that, but the Zener cards, the typical ESP testing that people remember, the star, the wave, square. And so he was doing that in classrooms, had some guy named Carl Zener design those cards. And in the early 1930s, he was already doing experiments at Duke University. And by 1937, he established the Journal of Parapsychology, which was pretty much the very first academic scientific venture into parapsychology. And this journal is where all the reputable institutions report from, Princeton, Stanford, the SRI, all that kind of stuff. They report to the Journal of Parapsychology. And so it really is an important piece to know about before we talk about kind of these other offshoots and other people like Stanley Krypner. So it really started with J.B. Rhine at Duke University in the early 1930s. And that journal, 1937. And then, that's kind of where it starts. And then Danny could talk about advances in parapsychological research and Stanley Krypner. Yeah, it's really important to understand that.
Again, advances in parapsychological research was kind of a collection of an evolving collection of all the testing and research that had been done across all the different universities or different labs. And it was edited by Krypner. So Stanley Krypner was a parapsychologist. He was interested a lot in ESP, dream telepathy. So he worked at Maimonides Dream Labs with a couple other famous names in parapsychology, like Ullman, and so he was heavily involved in all different kinds of ESP research. But the interesting thing with him, like Crypted pointed out, was that he also sat on the board for gifted and talented education. So there he is our link between ESP testing or psi testing and the GATE program itself, because he was heavily involved in both.
Yeah, he was the editor. He was the editor of that series, Advances in Parapsychological Research, but he also documented his own experiments within the pages. So he's and he did a lot. He was like a professor at like Kent State. He was a child psychologist. He was friends with the Grateful Dead. This motherfucker, I don't even know how he had time to like care for anybody or anything, because he was just working 100% of the time.
Yeah, he was really interested in being a magician. He was interested in mentalism and basically how to trick people. And then that kind of led him into parapsychology and if it was real, and he thought it was. He became friends with J.B. Rhine. So he worked very closely with him. And J.B. Rhine is pretty much the daddy of parapsychology. Definitely an interesting character.
I feel like with all of this, something I kept coming back to in my first couple of conversations about this topic was like, because it's valid, the incentive structure behind it, right? Like, these people, sometimes there's going to be people who create a cult because they're mentally ill or they're really passionate about a certain thing. Sometimes, usually a mixture of those, right? Like, but our government, this intelligence, I say our government, but the intelligence agencies, there has been at least documented since 1970, looks like probably well before that, lots of research, covert research at scale, done into this particular thing. And like, it's one flavor of it, right? Where like CIA might potentially be studying American children for ESPs that they can potentially cultivate and harness over a long period of time as a strategic deterrent / weapon for their nation state. But then like there's theories in the past and rumors in the past of like Hitler and, that faction tapping into the spirit world in their own interesting negative way and utilizing that for bad as well too. And there's this thing that's spelled out cross-culturally of the struggle between good and evil. And this is very loaded, but like, I say all this because I want to hear from both of you after digesting all of this, and we can unpack this piece by piece. But do you think the government and the CIA has been having these experiments on children covertly, and probably still is? We can't say for sure, but probably still is in some way, because there's actually something to it? Or do you think this is some interesting expression or cultural phenomenon in general, kind of like Crypto, what you were expressing about these children in China, right? Where it's like people in the masses can get massively swept up into a phenomenon, into a way of thinking, into a cult-like thinking, into a delusion at scale sometimes, right? And there is this thing where, like, as a country, if we see that happening, we are incentivized, if we think maybe these kids have special powers, to see if ours have special powers, even if none of the kids have special powers, right? Um, so yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think that we have some sort of like, um, do you think this is a trainable human function that they're studying, or do you think it's a bunch of bullshit?
I'll
Why
let
don't you
Danny.
take that?
Oh,
Okay.
I was going to say I'll let you go
It's
first.
a big
Okay.
question.
Okay. For me, I don't personally believe in psychic abilities. I mean, I've been researching this for a while, and I don't, I don't really buy it in terms of abilities. Okay, so, which is kind of funny because people are always, I'm very passionate about this, but in a way where I'm passionate because I want to get down to the extents that uh, these institutions went to test for psychic ability. Like, did they use drugs in the classroom? Which there is some cases where they used it in a Yale medical school. Some students were. We'll talk about that later. But so those are the things I'm interested in. Is like, what disturbing lengths did they go to test kids covertly for psychic ability? Uh, do I believe in psychic phenomena as a phenomena? I don't really believe in it as an ability. I believe that sometimes there are unexplainable things that happen. Sometimes, like unexplainable synchronicities or unexplainable what seems to be coincidences, or maybe tiny sporadic moments. But I do not believe that it can be honed in as an ability, and I have
Mm.
not seen that at all. I mean, even if you look at Project Stargate, a lot of the main the guys who were remote viewing, they the biggest thing that skeptics and believers took away from that is that it's very inconsistent. They would have a guy who would accurately describe coordinates in an envelope one day, and then the next day he'd be completely off on his ventures. So it's even if there is moments of success in that, it doesn't seem to be reliable as a ability. And I have not
Mm.
personally seen or read or encountered anything that convinces me that the ability is real. And
Yeah.
that's just my opinion. I mean, I always tell people I
It's
could be wrong, and if I'm wrong and something changes my mind one day, I will say that. But for now, I
it's
don't buy it.
it's such an interesting fence you're riding, man. And I think that, like, in some ways, I think in a lot of ways, I agree with you in the way that, like, I'm open to it, right? Like, it'd be awesome if somebody out there really can remote view and over time could cultivate that into like a positive tool that they can use for humanity in some way. Like, I'm open to that. That's cool, right? But I have yet to meet anybody or evidence that convinces me where I would stand on that with conviction yet to this point. I definitely don't have it, right? Um, but like, yeah, no, and I think that's like an important sort of like line to ride with this. And I agree with you. Danny, what do you kind of think about this?
Yeah.
So, once again, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum from Crypted. I do believe in psiability, but not from my own experiences. Basically, from the things that I've researched and different books that I've read. I don't necessarily think it can be something that can be trained, although they tried a lot. They did all sorts of games to try to elicit experiences or to try to train experiences. And I don't think that they really had much success in training it. In fact, I'm writing an episode now on Dr. Puharich, who is a whole other character who was not necessarily involved in GATE, but he was heavily involved in psi research and even brought kids to an estate he had where he would test for psiability. And there's a lot of rumors that NASA was involved in it. And he actually, there's a lot of crossover into the UFO community because he thought that he could communicate with extraterrestrials. So it like opens up this whole other segment of spiritualism or consciousness studies when it comes to extraterrestrials and all that stuff. But the point is that Dr. Puharich, when he was communicating with these extraterrestrials, was told that you cannot train this. It's an
Mm-hmm.
expansion of human consciousness, and at one point you're going to hit a wall and you're not going to be able to go past it. And that
Yeah.
the way that we understand and try to experiment on ESP is never going to work. And I tend to agree with that because I come from the more spiritual side of this, and that's the lens that I look at it through. That you can't all there you can't force an expansion of consciousness. I think, with certain drugs you can, but as far as what they were trying to do, I think there are way too many variables. I certainly think they tried, but I could also be persuaded because then I think about Stargate, and I know Cryptid has a very different opinion, but I do believe that they were training some sort of psychic spies, or at least trying to. And I
So
think that they had some success.
And
I'm
hey,
going to loop
Gabe,
this into something. Yeah.
before we go into that, honestly, I realized I brushed over your initial question too, and you were talking about like why they were testing, like why did they continue this testing for so long, and like is it because there's something to it, or because I realized I brushed over that question. So let me just address this real quick. The reason they tested so much from the 1930s in classrooms, whether it be American classrooms or classrooms in Canada, the UK, this is pretty much a global thing. The reason they did this is because, as Danny kind of said at the end there, there's a lot of variables. And so, for example, they would test children with their teacher, a teacher that they really liked. And sometimes they would instruct teachers or whoever was, the experimenter, they would instruct these experimenters to act friendly with the children and see how the results of the psychic test goes out, like see how the children perform psychically with somebody acting friendly. The next time they would test a classroom, they would tell the experimenter, whether it be the teacher or someone else, they would tell them act unfriendly. Sometimes they would tell them to act monotone. Sometimes they would, and so they would document the results of that, and then they'd be like, the students kind of performed the same whether the teacher was friendly or not. Maybe the lights had something to do with this. So the next experiments they would turn the lights off in the classroom. And so then they would say, you know what, that didn't make too much of a difference. Maybe it's because it was raining. So long story short, it's literally they were so like neurotic about all the different variables that went into psych testing that's why there was not only so many, I mean, I'm talking thousands of experiments every single year for decades in classrooms covertly. And but that's really why, is because they really were trying to establish a trend. They were trying to establish some kind of fundamental trend that they can then base further studies off and say like, hey, if we do this and this and that, we tend to have psychic results. They were trying to find that trend, which is why, if you're asking me about like gifted programs, and a lot of people believe they were selected because they have psychic powers or abilities, it doesn't seem like that they had a trend in order to base to identify students with in that way.
Mm.
It seemed like they were busy trying to establish
Yeah.
that trend.
I also
Interesting.
think part of your question was something about the government. I really believe in my gut that maybe they weren't as interested in parapsychology as they were psychological warfare. And because they were, especially at the beginning of the space race and during the Cold War, they were very interested in controlling American citizens' outlook. And I think that if they were testing for ESP or any kind of parapsychological research that the government themselves were doing, I think that they were trying to use it as some kind of psychological warfare tool. Because when you look back at Tavistock and all the things Tavistock was doing and how it still affects American lives today, particularly working in corporations and motivation to keep working, to keep paying taxes, all the things that the media does to brainwash. It goes really deep, and I'd be very, very surprised if this one thing they weren't doing. I just think that there's so much circumstantial evidence out there that even though I don't have the proof, I find it very hard to believe that the government was not involved in psiability in children or using psiability as some kind of psychological tool. So that's my stance on it. I haven't proved it yet, but like I said, there's an awful lot of circumstantial evidence out there.
Yeah, I intuitively, since the beginning of my conversations about this topic, I have intuitively had this sense that either is massively overconflated and or the psi abilities, I think more so likely, these psi abilities are very, very fucking difficult to train and or slightly like can't be trained in this way where if there is some ability to train them, we're just like barely fucking scratching the surface. And like, they know that. And even then, something that's been noticed within it and noted within it is the observation of like this classroom setting, right? And the importance of the person not knowing that what's going on is ESP research, right? And like this kind of like mindset that they're in and this particular setting of environment that they're in when these experiments are being had, it's very important to the overall way that it plays out. And like, this is going to sound fucking strange, but if there is some otherworldly mystical thing at play here that we're interfacing with, just scratching the surface of, right? Maybe it truly is the case that this is a real phenomenon. People do tap into it at times, but it can't be trained. Maybe it's selectively trained. Maybe there's like, this is going to sound really strange, but okay. So I just had this conversation with these people who are part of a project called DMTX, where they put people into the DMT state for an extended period of time. Crypted, have you ever done, Danny, have you guys ever done psychedelics?
No, I've only done weed and alcohol, so I'm pretty
Gotcha.
much standard bad boy.
I have,
Gotcha.
yes.
So it makes sense that Danny would believe in ESPs and you wouldn't.
Yeah, that's what I told him. As an
Well,
experiment, we should make him do just to see if his mind changes.
I mean, to be
but
honest, I would take it as a hallucination. I understand that people believe that they're making contact with other worlds or entities, but I genuinely I tend to think it's a hallucination. And is it possible? It's possible, but it still doesn't. It still doesn't change. It still doesn't change my mind that psychic abilities are real. I mean, if you look at somebody like Uri Geller, who was studied by the CIA, referenced by the CIA, he's been caught doing tricks, faking the funk. So I don't believe
I think
psychic
you got to do it,
abilities.
man. I think you got to do it, and then you'll know what it's going to do to you. But I
I'm
bring
open to
all
it.
this up because I had a recent conversation with these people who are part of this project called DMTX, where they're researching what it's like. Usually with DMT, it's one of the most powerful psychedelics in the world. It takes you to other dimensions within a matter of seconds, and you're usually there for somewhere between like 3 to 15 minutes. It's kind of like this weird window, but it can feel like a flash of a moment. It can feel like an entire lifetime within this, 6 minutes that you're there. But they're finding a way. Part of the DMT experience is that it's so fainting, and it's had due to its pharmacology and how it's easily metabolized by our brains so quickly. But they have this new technology where they're able to put people in there for hours at a time. And something really interesting and there's a lot of like interesting things that they're trying to like uncover within this, kind of like you just said, Crypted, a second ago. Like, is it just a hallucination that people are experiencing? Are we able to like map these dimensions? Is there consistent motifs and beings and messages that are being articulated throughout these experiences that people are having separate from one another without being imprinted on from one another? That is absolutely happening. And then it's in this really interesting way as well too. Some people, they have it down to a science where they know, hey, this is breakthrough level. And it's this really interesting technology due to IV where they can bring you up into the DMT breakthrough space in a matter of seconds and completely bring you back down in a matter of seconds. Whereas normal like smoking methods, you're kind of stuck there until it wears off after a few minutes. But
That's
they
cool.
have people. Yeah. It's something that's been reported for a long time within the DMT community. And you can go into Reddit and see reports of this, is people experience this phenomenon of getting blocked out. and they don't know why. They'll know they smoked enough DMT to go there, but the entities or something stops them and says, hey, this is not your time. Don't fuck with this space. There's consistently this feeling when you are met with this experience as if something else above you is actually truly within control of it, knows exactly what the fuck you're up to at all times. And it's kind of like playing along with you and playing this crazy dance, divine cosmic dance with you. And something
Mm-hmm.
that they have found within DMTX is that some people get blocked out and are told, hey, dude, this isn't your time to come fuck with the spirit world in this particular way. And so I say all that in this very like loaded way to say, like, once again, maybe these like particular psi phenomenon can't be trained, or the spirit world isn't allowing it to be fucked with in this evil CIA type of way and to be harnessed in that evil CIA type of way. But with, so I lean in that way because I've had some really weird mystical experiences myself, but I also keep the skepticism that you have, Crypted, of like, I personally haven't remote viewed in that way. I haven't met somebody who I can say for sure, like, I believe that they remote viewed and they showed it to. I've read interesting books and things like that, but like, um, yeah, it's a very, it's a, there's a lot that I just threw at you guys, but like, yeah,
No, that's a
what do
good
you think
point.
of that, man?
That's a
Yeah.
really good point. And I actually do find things like that really interesting with DMT. Sorry, with DMT. With DXM, people have kind of encountered something similar. There's a specific kind of book, I forgot what it's called, The Psychonaut's Journey to the something. But long story short, he wrote about these entities that he called the Dream Police, and it basically was kind of similar, where they did not allow him to go into certain areas of the trip because he was just told he couldn't go there. But I find this area of sorry, they're doing like work outside of my house. But and the same thing with Benadryl. I covered Benadryl a lot on my channel, where people take Benadryl and they see the Hat Man, or they'll go to the shadow people world. Basically, to be honest, I find that different than psychic ability. I believe the real question is: are they tapping into a dimension, or are they hallucinating? I think it's a little bit of, it could be a little bit of both. I like the idea of like they're tapping into a dimension. I like the idea of it. I'm not going to lie. I like the idea of it, but I think this is different than like a psychic ability. Like, I think it's a different kind of, thing we're talking about here. I think psychic ability, where people are saying that they, cause I've encountered people that tell me like they, a big thing with gate kids, they talk about how when they're in front of law enforcement, they can sort of like back law enforcement away, or like that stuff. I'm like, oh, I kind of roll my eyes at. I'm like, all right. But, I think that's a different conversation than like, talking about the worlds you can see or potentially tap into with psychedelics. I think that's different than psi phenomena, in my opinion.
Danny, what do you think about this? This question. Do you think that there's a connection between like psychic ability and some of these altered states of consciousness that people can get into with psychedelics?
I think that there have been studies like the sheep goat study that proves that just having a belief in psi ability automatically makes you better. And it's not because you've had an experience, it's because simply your belief. So I think that people that have done psychedelics and have witnessed other dimensions are probably automatically gonna sense the oneness of all things. And I think that it's much easier to get your brain to believe something like psi ability, so you're automatically going to be better at it. I don't know that there's a connection other than that, but I know that they have tested long-term effects of psychedelics and proven that people that have had profound experiences, it lasts them lifetimes. That they now see even inanimate objects as something with a spirit, and that there is a connectedness of all things. So when you look at it from that perspective, I do think that it is it is kind of in the same vein of thought or same vein of belief system. So you might automatically be better at it. But I also think that we're on Earth to be 3D beings, and we are limited by our human bodies and our human consciousness, and that we can only get so far. I think that's why eventually some people are stopped at some point,
Mm-hmm.
because we're not supposed to. We're not, I think part of being human is we're not supposed to know. And I think that's another reason that psiability is so hard to pin down, because how do you pin down consciousness? How do you do that?
Mhm.
And it's interesting because Dr. Purik, the guy that I've been looking into, when he was speaking supposedly with this these alien beings, they were using words that had very religious undertones. So words like grace, like it comes to you through grace, you cannot force it. It's almost like an awakening, like you have a profound experience and now you can do these things, or now you understand these things, and it's not so much of a mystery. So all in all, I don't know that there's a connection between ESP and psychedelic experiences or um, altered states of consciousness, but I
Could
think
be.
they tried. Yeah,
That could
could
be.
be,
This is
could
just
be,
my
but I don't
opinion. It's
know.
just my opinion. I don't want people to be like, oh, whatever. But this is just my opinion.
Yeah. I'm like, what's interesting, I don't know if you guys have seen any of this recently within the media. Within the media, I say within the media because everyone's media is different nowadays. We're all have living in these like algorithmically driven realities, right? But like it's something I've noticed within my media space, and I remember back when I was like, like 20 years old, you see like Alex Jones talking about uh, the technocratic sort of like billionaires, elites, one percenters using these psychic states, psychic abilities, sometimes psychedelic drugs themselves to tap in and use that for dark reasons, tap into demonic forces and interface with demonic forces. It was, I have this interesting circle of friends out there in LA, Crypted, shout out to you, but they're interestingly connected to a lot of people, and the rhetoric around the last couple of years around ketamine in particular, this one compound that's kind of become popular in the past few years, but ketamine, um, it, the rhetoric around it has shifted. It has a darker feeling, and there's a lot of people. I'm not going to say them by name. I might tell you after the fact, but there's even like a famous musician who like they know like who is using ketamine in this like really kind of like dark way and turning it down this like dark path. And there's like I've even seen this with like a couple of my friends themselves, where like in the abuse of a lot of drugs will turn people down a dark path, and you can psychotically dress that up as like the demons have got them or whatever. But when there is this manicness and this thing associated with it where they are interfacing with something, when they speak about this thing they're interfacing with, and it's like telling them that they need to make certain changes and stuff like that, it's really odd. And so like I say all that because like maybe I asked you, Danny, the connection with psychic abilities and psychedelics. Like, I agree with you in that maybe there's some lightness involved in it, and that maybe some people get this spark of just being more open to it, and so things funnel through them more, and there's more of this divine light that gets funneled through people, and that's why you see this in visionary artists and things like that. But also, then maybe there's the dudes doing ketamine wondering, like asking the robotic cow beings how we're going to rule the world, and they're getting answers. I don't know. It's just this entire thing, right? Like I said since the beginning, um, I don't know what it is. I want to stand on it with conviction, but I feel like there's something here. There's too many decades of research for it to be. They're just unpacking a hoax, And if it is a psychological social phenomenon, it's really fucking telling and really interesting as well too. At the same time, you
And
know.
I should add that they did use altered states of consciousness before testing for ESP. So I think that they did think that reaching at least a certain level of relaxation was helpful. But then we can get into the gateway tapes, and if they actually did play them in school because it was to elicit an out of body experience or an altered state of consciousness so that you could reach psychic ability easier. Not sure that they had success with that, but they did experiment with it. So it could be related. They at least tested to see if it was.
Yeah. Can either one of you tell me yet? I know this is an area where I think you guys are both still kind of researching a bit, but can either one of you tell me yet, like, how does gait in particular intersect with this? Has there been anything that you guys have unpacked yet regarding that?
I'll give Crypted the credit for this, but I think that gait isn't necessarily what we're looking at. I think that there's a lot of overlap. So, a lot of kids who were in gait have a lot of shared memories because, as we've proven, they were testing for ESP in the classroom. So, it would have been a lot easier to test kids that were in gait for a few reasons. One, because gait in particular, the teachers had full autonomy with what they wanted to do. And if they ran in certain academic circles, or if they had certain interests in parapsychology, it would have been the perfect place to do it because there wasn't a lot of oversight. They were allowed to do whatever they wanted for curriculum. And also, these were smart kids. These aren't your average, kindergartner bouncing off the wall and not able to focus. These are very highly intelligent children that can follow directions. So I think that that's why a lot of gate kids remember this, because it would have been the best place to test for that. But I personally believe that that's where it stops. Again, I could be persuaded with evidence in the future, but where we're at right now, that's just my opinion. I don't think it was limited to gate. And there was also plenty of other types of gifted and talented education programs that were a little bit more strict and used different types of curriculum that maybe didn't do the same kinds of testing or the same kinds of activities in the classroom. Um,
Yeah, the thing that's coming to my mind right now, and I'm just like openly brainstorming. I prepped a lot for this episode, but I have not written down in my notes yet. I don't know why, but you're speaking about, and I appreciate everything you just said, Danny, in the context on that, and like I agree with you. That makes sense. Like probably was the case that Gate was like a good opportunity for some of this, but it didn't all exist in Gate, right? But one of the things that came to my mind, if you guys ever heard of the telepathy tapes? Cryptid, have you ever heard of the
yes.
telepathy tapes?
I have, but I haven't done a lot of research on it.
Well, and the basic idea is that there's this interesting research done on children with autism. And Danny, you can correct me if I'm butchering any of this, please. But this research done on autism, where I guess you could probably classify it as the ESP. They had phenomenon that was really strange and bizarre, like being able to tell where their mother was at in the grocery store at what moment, and like communicate with each other telepathically, and you feel free to go through and make a video and fact check that one up. I've watched both sides of the argument, but either way, it's really interesting, and like it's something I guess is a little. I really appreciated that um, inquiry into the telepathy tapes and researching that, because as a little boy, I've always wondered that about people with autism and special needs. Like, what was their reality like, and what are they truly experiencing? Like, you don't know unless you're in that, right? And it opened up this door of thinking for me, the telepathy tapes, of like, whoa, maybe autistic people, maybe it's not, maybe all of it isn't just like, it's not all just like disability. For some of them, at sometimes maybe it's like this different ability that they have, and it's just like different reality that they're in that isn't always necessarily great for survival or for getting a job. But when it comes to telepathically or remote viewing or whatever, maybe it is more beneficial. And that's what some of these telepathy tape things were pointing to. And so now I'm starting to wonder if like maybe there was programs and experiments done. I don't think there's been anything unpacked, but like maybe there's some experiments done on children with autism as well too, and they would have been great candidates probably. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Excuse me. Cryptid knows more about that than I do, as far as what types of disabilities they had tested. But I will say that Ingo Swann, who was a renowned remote viewer who worked heavily under the Stargate project, they did different brain scans on him, and they found that his brain was structurally different. So it was his occipital lobe, which I think is located down at the base of your skull, was huge. So they figured out that there is something structurally with the brain that may make you a better remote viewer or a better psychic. So I do think that people with autism, like you said, it's not a disability, it's a different ability. They probably have different structures that are more powerful than normal. And so I could totally see that being the case. But they did do testing on different types of abilities, didn't they, Cryptid?
Yeah. So first of all, two most absolutely smartest people that I've ever met in my life have been autistic. So I almost feel like if you're not autistic, you're not smart. No, I'm kidding. No, but they really have been the most incredible smart guys. A little socially not like the best, but like I don't care about stuff like that. But anyway, point is yeah, they found that, and here's why there's such a sort of like this convoluted thing. Gifted and talented programs are all about smart kids, right? Well, the highest performing students have been the mentally disabled. So it's totally the opposite of gifted and talented. It's actually the mentally disabled who have scored the highest on ESP testing, and also people with thyroid conditions. And here's where it gets trippy is that people with thyroid conditions score high on ESP testing, and their test scores actually go down as they get treated for their thyroid condition. So as they better their thyroid condition, their test scores go down. But if they have that thyroid condition active, they score high on ESP. So that's kind of a weird phenomena that has been documented in a couple of different studies. Yeah. So I forgot what the other question was, but yeah, there's that.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Thyroid. So what was it, like a notable increase in their abilities, or was it just kind of like the slight observation? I don't know if you recall.
No, they were like
curious.
they would all score really high. Like, and this is just yes, they would all score really high. I mean, there's kind of a couple, like I said, there's no real trend, but if there is a couple of trends, it seems to be that the mentally disabled score high, people with thyroid conditions score high, and the younger the student or the younger the child is, they also score high. So younger children will often score higher than a high school student, for example, which they tested many high school, many middle schools. The younger preschool, kindergarten kids, those are the kids that are scoring the highest on ESP testing.
They even tested boys versus girls too, and there was no trend there. They thought that girls would test better, but they were about the same.
It reminds me of...
Sometimes they did.
Yeah. It reminds me of this one particular case of, sometimes when people are going through hallucinatory persisting perception disorder or psychosis or schizophrenia or this spectrum of altered reality that people can be living in, right? Most of it's kind of like unexplainable, and a lot of it we're still like kind of like piecing together, and just like, especially like schizophrenia and stuff, like we're starting to kind of like piece that together a bit, but there's a lot that we still don't know. But there was this one particular case of this gentleman who was entering into this pretty heavy state of what he called kind of like schizophrenia, this like heavy visionary state that came out of nowhere that wasn't normal for him. And he assumed it was just like this onsetting of schizophrenia or something like that. Well, it turned out that he had a brain tumor. This brain tumor was like pressing up against his pineal gland. And for like the last, we can Google this story right now as I'm talking about it, but like pineal gland tumor guy artist. But he turned into like this, like, he started creating art, a bunch of art of like what he was experiencing. And he was essentially what it looked like via the art, just living in this like, DMT-esque state, this psychedelia-like state via his pineal gland being pushed on and compressed by this tumor in this really bizarre way. And so like, that's just one case of where this physical observation of changes being made to the brain, creating this massively altered reality, but not just altered in the way that we typically think it of like things are bad or things are different or things aren't clicking. Like that guy entered into like divinity state. And like with these people with their occipital lobes being bigger, it's not just like, oh, they're socially awkward and everything else is down here. It's like, no, maybe they're a little bit socially awkward, but they can fucking see you from across the world. You know what I'm saying? Like have you guys ever seen Finding Dory in that scene where the beluga whale is doing his like echolocation and finding people. That's kind of what it makes me think of. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting about the pineal gland too, because as we know, the fluoride affects the pineal gland. So then there's a subset of gate kids that think that they were fed fluoride and told to swallow it so that it could potentially affect their pineal gland, and that the theory is that the government wanted to shut that down. Um, so it's just
Mm.
another strange aspect to it.
Yeah. So I've heard that one before. There's a lot of like theories with the pink drinks, but can you tell me more, Danny, about or Cryptid about these substances that they potentially used and where is there any evidence behind the fluoride claim or any of these other claims of particular
There is.
substances? Yeah.
Yeah, there is. They had a swish and spit program in schools across the country through decades, and it was to fluoridate the teeth. But fluoridating inside the mouth and swallowing it are two very different things. We've found no evidence so far that anybody was told to swallow it, besides people's memories. And then there's also what was called disclosure tabs. I had those in school. They're little pink tabs, and you chew them, and they turn your teeth pink or purple, and it shows where the plaque is. So basically, it was just to teach kids like you're not brushing good enough. Your teeth look like shit. So that's what those were for. But there's a lot of confusion around some of these memories, like because from the stance of this whole conspiracy theory, you can look back and be like, well, wait a minute, why were they giving me any substances in school, let alone something that's known to shut down psiability? So I can see the leaps there. I think there was one other pink drink that they were giving in schools. I don't recall what it was, but those are the two main ones that we can confirm did happen. Nefarious, not necessarily, but it did happen.
In terms
So
of psi testing, like in terms of these psychic experiments going on in schools, I have not encountered anything that crosses over with the swish and spit programs. Because the swish and spit programs, I mean, that is for sure. But in terms of was that part of the psi testing? I have not come across anything that states that. Yes, they have used substances in classrooms. A lot of those classrooms have been they've been universities like Yale Medical Center, for example. Those students they were dosed unknowingly. By the way, these were college students though, but they were so people might not care so much as children, but you know what I mean. They were still given sodium amytal, which is a hardcore barbiturate. Causes hypnotic effects, memory loss, stuff like that, and they were given it without consent. All for a
that's so
psychic
fucking
experiment.
crazy.
Uh-huh.
Within the United States, they fed people unknowingly a barbiturate with the intentions of measuring psychic ability.
Yes.
That is a government document. That is fucking crazy, dude.
And
That's not a light
yes,
substance. A barbiturate's a very serious substance
it's hardcore.
to take. Yeah, yeah, man. It's wow.
So
But
then, we've
yeah.
tried to. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say me and Danny actually we're gonna do a video on this probably sometime next month, early next month. We're gonna do a video that's all centered around the drugs that they use in psychic experiments. So I just kind of wanted to give a little quick plug.
Yeah. So I was just going to say we also tried to really investigate if there was a possibility of sodium amytal being the pink drink substance, because it is possible that they made it into an oral suspension and that it was pink, because they did dye medication certain colors so that it was easier for dosing. But there isn't really evidence that sodium amytal was the pink drink that everybody remembers. But it's interesting because that's one of the main memories in our audience. There's people out there that say over and over again things like, yes, they took me in this room and they did this and that. They made me listen to meditation tapes, they tested my ability, and then they gave me the pink drink. So I'm hard pressed to dismiss it. I don't have evidence for it. Again, a memory is not evidence, but I'm very interested in that trail because it's a huge one, and it doesn't feel very good to have a memory like that and wonder, what somebody did to you, without your parents knowing. It's supposed to be a place of trust, and That's horrific, you know.
I think something that really bothers people about this is everything that you just alluded to, that it's supposed to be a safe place. They're doing it without your consent. Like, um, the parents don't know. But I think there's this like thing happening collectively with us where we're starting to wake up to the fact that we're not as free as we thought we were. And also to parents, I think that scares them a lot because a lot of parents are waking up to the fact that they're not, they don't have as much ownership over their own child as they thought they did. There's a lot of parents that are having to like fight the state on weird things that they feel like they shouldn't have to, right? And this just is like another layer of it of like, okay, now what the fuck are you doing to my kid? And you didn't even ask me, you know?
Right.
Like, whenever I first had these two conversations, with my buddy Jake, I was casually having this conversation with my mom, and I brought up the gifted and talented thing. Like, she reflected on, like, because I used to tell her like random things about the gifted and talented class, and she doesn't really have a lot of memories behind it, or like what I said to her. But like, just when I was like laying this on her, and she was just like, you could tell it's just like what the fuck, this another layer of just like holy shit. Um, and so yeah, I guess, what do you guys think? Do you think that these experiments are still going on? Or
They
do you
are.
think the Launchpad podcast has brought them to an end at this point?
Yeah, they're done. They're done after this. They're still going on, but they're not as crazy as they once were. Um, that mostly, I actually covered this in my recent video, so it's still kind of fresh in my mind. But they basically, so a lot of the more hardcore experiments were done without consent, and that really changed in the like early 1980s. Basically, after the early 1980s, they established this thing called Subpart D, where children were recognized as a protected research class. Before that, they weren't. So even in school, children were not protected as a research population in classrooms. So in the early 1980s, they released or they instituted Subpart D, and now children were protected. Now consent forms were required. So yes, they still conduct experiments like this, all types of institutions, and we'll talk. This is a very important point to drive home. So it's various institutions. This isn't. A lot of people think of this as like the government, one government entity, just operating in. There's a lot of misconception there. We'll dissect that a little bit in a few, but long story short, yes, they still conduct these experiments, and it's still reputable institutions like Occidental College, which I grew up 5 minutes away. They're still conducting these experiments, but it's a lot more vanilla. They have to have parental consent. They have to be approved by some kind of ethics community, which is some kind of college ethical committee, basically. They have to go through a lot of hoops to even get into a school. And I've actually spoke to not only gifted and talented teachers, but I've actually spoke to school administrators and asked them about this. Not only did the ones I spoke to did not know about this here in LA, Los Angeles, but they say that it's reiterated to me like how hard it would be for them to do that now, because if anyone comes into a classroom now, the school administrators would have to absolutely know. And I know Danny knows a little bit about this too, but yeah, so yes, it still goes on, but it's very vanilla. It's more like, here's some guessing games for children, and the parents have to consent, and they're not doing anything weird or as they once were. In the 80s, they were kind of early 80s, they were going crazy, 70s crazy, but and this is not to say that some nefarious stuff doesn't still happen, because we know people break the law all the time, right? We know that. So yes, they could be breaking the law in some portions. It could still be disturbing, but for the most part, it's more vanilla. They need consent. They need to jump through a lot of hoops. But yes, it goes on still.
Yeah, for me, it's not whether or not it's still happening as far as side testing. To me, it's the level of control. Like you were talking about, parents having to jump through hoops to get out of the clutches of the state. And it's still happening. And as far as where your child's data goes, there's something called the SLDS, which is the statewide longitudinal data system. and you have no control where your information on your child goes. So if your child is in a gifted and talented program, if there's any behavioral attendance issues, grades, all of that gets sent to the federal government. That is what's most uncomfortable to me, because there's no need for that level of tracking. So that's what bothers me the most. I don't know if psi testing is still happening. If it is, I don't think it's nefarious. I'm more concerned about what the government is doing.
Yeah, it is though. It is their Journal of Parapsychology. I've been reading the Journal of Parapsychology, the recent volumes, and they're still testing in classrooms. They also document things that are outside of classroom context. Sometimes they'll go to a house and test children and stuff like that. So they're still doing it. They're still interested. Parapsychology is still they're trying to make it an academic field. But yeah, it still happens.
Interesting. Super interesting. Okay, so Crypted, if people want to take it upon themselves to be citizen scientists here, researchers, how do they go about potentially finding more research like you did, uncovering these CIA documents?
Well, yes, you can. When it comes down to like a lot of like CIA documents, for example, you can really get lost in the whirlwind of trying to find it. Unless you know what the fuck you're looking for, you could spend hours just wasting your time reading a bunch of CIA fluff to find one good thing that, I luckily encountered something early on by accident pretty much. And it was just kind of a lucky encounter. But now, and I didn't mean to plug this in here, but me and Danny have actually started a Patreon, and it's just to support our research, and we got to pay the bills and stuff, right? But in the Patreon, Danny has actually created something called the Vault, and the Vault is sort of this little place where we're laying out every single document that we found, and we're trying to make it easy for people to make connections, because there's a lot of key figures involved, like Stanley Krypner, Puharich, Rhea White, Margaret Anderson. These are names that are important if you really want to understand this. So we're trying to make it all in one place, digestible, and being able to understand what the hell you're looking at and make those connections, because it's kind of a convoluted rabbit hole. But if people want to just go research on their own time, Internet Archive is a great source. You could type in advances in parapsychological research. You'll only find 2 volumes available on Internet Archive of advances in parapsychological research. I've actually forked over a little bit of money to actually get physical copies of very rare books of these kind of stuff, of these kind of volumes. But yeah, Internet Archive is a great tool if you want to type in like the Journal of Parapsychology or Advances in Parapsychological Research. But yeah, if you're looking for a little bit of more of that guiding sort of force, me and Danny have created that podcast, and we're just trying to make this digestible and explore every avenue, really cook it through thoroughly, and make sure people understand what the hell they're doing and looking at.
Nice. Very nice. I love how, yeah, that's powerful. Okay, cool. I'll make sure that I link that, your guys' Patreon down in the description below. And of course, all of your guys' stuff and the research and everything like that. But okay, is there anything else that you guys kind of wanted to say to the audience? Any last thoughts, notes? I'm definitely open to having you guys back on as this kind of story evolves. But yeah.
Sure. I do have something that's kind of important that we haven't touched on that I think is important for everyone to understand, which is that so people think there's a difference between institutional studies and governmental studies. There's not. It's one and the same. So, I've actually seen this criticism where people say like, oh yeah, but these are institutions that are, like universities that are conducting studies in schools. So if you know about the way the CIA works, the CIA, for example, with MK Ultra, a lot of those studies, yes, they had times where they, had a sort of hideaway house and they were inviting prostitutes and stuff like that with MK Ultra. But if you know how the CIA works, they use institutions as a front. So in the case of MK Ultra, they used Harvard as a front. So Harvard was essentially used in order to conduct these to facilitate these experiments. This is something similar here, where you're using institutions such as Princeton, Duke University, UC Irvine, for example, is another one that's mentioned. UC Davis is another one that's mentioned. These institutions are fronted by governmental agencies. So when you're looking at an institutional study, it's one and the same as a governmental experiment. Not always. It's important to understand this. Not every single university study that has been where they send researchers into classrooms is linked to the government. But that's where you can kind of get lost in the sauce, because sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And that's important to understand. So don't discredit this just because you hear Duke University was behind this study. Well, guess who's funding Duke University? The CIA. And a lot of these times you'll find these key figures like Stanley Krypner who have all these connections to the CIA, the Monroe Institute, which made the Gateway tapes. And by the way, the Gateway tapes, if you go on their website, it says it's safe for children. It actually said that's safe for children. So they actually had to have some kind of preliminary information in order to even come to that conclusion. So long story short, institutional experiments are often linked to government experiments. And so just because it doesn't say CIA behind Duke University, they're not going to say that. It's just going to be presented as Duke University presents this experiment.
Yeah, and another reason for that, not just because the CIA wanted to hide behind these front groups, but also because they didn't have scientists, especially in the 50s. American students were not very smart, and they didn't have scientists. They didn't have astrophysicists. There was a big need for them, and that's why the U.S. government, the feds, became involved in public school systems to begin with. So they were really pushing to support children that had higher intelligence because they desperately needed them for defense projects. So when you see somebody working in like at Duke University, of course the government's going to use them because the government didn't necessarily have their own scientists. And when I say government, I mean the Department of Defense or the CIA. They had to outsource and they had to use documentation and research from other sources because they didn't have their own, hence them using the Journal of Parapsychology or Advances in Parapsychological Research. They had to. They didn't have their own study. But yeah, they absolutely funded front groups so that nobody knew that they were looking into these types of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Somebody who I've become a big fan of over the past year is a guy named Ian Carroll on YouTube. And he spent a lot of time in various different episodes and live episodes unpacking. And it's all interconnected in this really funny way, and it just compounds on itself over time, but unpacking how these intelligence agencies really are in a lot more control than what we would think. And that makes a lot of sense, Danny, what you just said. There's this incentive structure. One of the things I was saying a lot throughout this conversation, I keep coming back to, what is the incentive structure? That would be a huge incentive structure. And all of this is getting our kids accelerated and getting the next class of rocket scientists and say researchers and whoever else actually properly educated and able to compete at the global stage with, our adversaries at the same time. Gosh. Oh, this is juicy.
Right? It could go in so many different directions. So many.
Yeah. Okay, guys. I really appreciate y'all's time. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Like I said, I'll be sure to link your guys' channels and the information, all of that down below, your Patreon. But just tell people who you are and where they can find you real quick to close things out here.
Sure. My channel is Wicked Mysterious, and our Patreon is Unlocking Gate Restricted Access.
My channel is called Crypted Candy. I'm basically like the Mr. Beast of nothing, basically. And they actually call me Mr. Least. No, I'm kidding. So, yeah, I have Crypted Candy. I cover disturbing rabbit holes. This is something that I just kind of I made like 3-4 videos on this or something. And our podcast is called Unlocking Gate Restricted Access. Yes, clever name. I know, guys. And so, you can find us there, and Yeah, support, just to support our research. You know, I mean, we're trying to really provide a service too, and really make, you know, give you guys those documents here, handed to you. You know, you don't even have to, you just read it if you want. And then we make episodes. We try to make them at least once every 1 or 2 weeks. So, you know, we have our full-time YouTube stuff. So it's like, it's a lot, but yeah, that's where you can check me out.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Peace.
Later, Gabe.